Hello and welcome to episode 288 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, solar is shining in Jamaica after Hurricane Melissa tore through. The grid may be down, but the solar is like, no worries, man, I got this.
Brazil's environment minister is urging all countries at the COP30 climate summit to get together and make a schedule to phase out fossil fuels. Said fossil fuel executives, that sounds great. We'd like to be in charge of that.
Researchers at Purdue have developed and tested a new sodium-ion pouch battery that works down to minus 100 Celsius. But James, you ask, the coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth was minus 89.2 at the Soviet Vostok station in Antarctica on July 21st, 1983. Where do we use this?
Space, a final frontier.
Electric car maker Rivian is getting into electric bikes. Their first model was pricey at $4,500 US. Their new one is supposedly affordable at only $3,500. Reacting to criticism that $3,500 is not really affordable, Rivian has added a button on the website that makes it convenient and easy to sell one of your kidneys.
Brilliant! All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show.
All right, so like we've been doing lately, I have to start with a sports update. Our beloved Saskatchewan Roughriders have won the Grey Cup.
And there was much rejoicing.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah.
I guess. Not as much as there used to be.
Well, it's like we've won it a few times now, so it's not the big deal like it used to be. The one in 1989, everyone here that was alive then will remember that one. That was a big deal.
I've talked about this before in the show. My alternator on my gas car was broken, and I was going on battery power down Main Street in traffic jam for kilometers and kilometers of screaming people and wondering when my car would die and block off the street. And it never did. It never did. But I couldn't run the heat and I couldn't run anything. I had to just run the spark plugs essentially. And there was no computer at the time. At all, but yeah.
And I was working as a projectionist that night at a movie theater, and there was one person in watching the movie because everyone else was watching the Grey Cup. And I wanted to skip a reel. This was in the days when you had to change reels every 20 minutes in the projection booth. And I thought, I should just skip a reel so I can get this done early and go out and celebrate with everybody. But I didn't do it because I'm a good person.
I just wanted to point out that my daughter, who's turning 18 in a few days, was born during the Grey Cup.
Right.
That we won in 2007, which was the third one. And we got to the hospital in labor. First of all, we were peed off because at the time, I'm no longer a Rough Rider fan. Like everyone in this province is fanatic. But at the time we were, and we were very disappointed that my wife was going into labor during the Grey Cup day. And we're posting updates about it and everyone was sorry for us. We got to the hospital, the lights were out. Like this is a major city hospital and it was dark. The doors were open. And there was a little sign that said, in labor, pick up this phone. So he picked up the phone and I think some nurse came down from the labor ward and, Janice popped out the baby to 15 minutes before kickoff and we listened to the game. Long story short. And then the team actually designated my daughter the Rough Rider baby and gave her a bunch of stuff. And we were in the worst picture of me ever is in the newspaper after no sleep and a panic of having a second child. It was horrible. I had to get up the next morning for a newspaper shoot. And then my daughter, when she was little, would walk into the room like she was royalty and announce herself as the Rough Rider baby. And now she doesn't really know. But we've got a picture of her in the Grey Cup as a baby, sitting in the actual trophy, because somebody had it at their home because they worked with the organization, and my wife knew them, and we were invited over, and we took that picture. And so my daughter's asking me the other day, is it safe to assume that no one else has sat in that Grey Cup? And I said, it's quite possible. So she's looking for cred, I guess, because... And, some people don't even know what the Grey Cup is in Canada that she's talking to of her generation. Like, it's not what it used to be. It's no Super Bowl anymore.
Yeah, well, one of the oldest trophies in sport at 112 years old.
But then I took that photo and I made it come to life with AI, and that's just one of those weird things.
Sure.
I was watching Saturday Night Live, they had a sketch on about these programs that will turn old-timey photos into moving things, and they were making fun of AI, like the dog suddenly has two tails and no head, and grandma is freaked out, and she's trying to look at these old-timey photos. It worked, and it made fun of a lot of AI stuff. But most of the people I know either work in film or music. Like one of my friends works running the music club, John, and no one likes AI. Like they don't like fooling around with AI. They don't appreciate AI, but it's so fun when something new comes along. And I've got some photos of myself. There's no video of me, no film of me until I'm like 11 years old when we got a film camera, like an 8mm camera. So this one of like 3 photos of me below the age of 10, I brought to life, and it's hosing a car. Yeah. And it worked really well. Not only did it restore the photo, but it there's nothing weird about it. It's just crazy. And for the first few minutes, it's like a big, holy crap, look at this. And then after that, it's like, it's just AI.
You get used to it quick.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was one clean energy angle I wanted to mention from the Grey Cup, from the football game. You know, they often have sponsorship logos on the uniforms now. They're selling more and more advertising space.
I know what you're going to say.
I was disappointed to see that on the back of every sweater was a Mobil logo, as in Exxon Mobil, on both teams on the back of every sweater. And it was a little bit nauseating.
Yeah, like we're going to be pro-Mobil these days as the world burns, or at least ours does here in Canada.
Yeah.
So my daughter, I don't know what it was. We had a family discussion about our air quality monitors around here, and I was saying how bad the oil refinery is. And she started, finally asking questions. So I read from the chapter a little bit of the book that said what gets poured into the air.
Yeah.
And she took an interest. She started talking to her biochemistry teacher, who has a biochemistry degree, and asking about it. And she can't believe the legal system. She's just a naive child who's not an adult yet, who thinks that the legal system, how would they put up with this? How could they seal that thing that explains what the environmental impact of the refinery is that they successfully had sealed? And she's just completely let down by the world that we live in, which is big oil does whatever it gets to do, it is done, and the politicians abide by it. I don't know. There's weird things going on with my monitors. I've got one that is an indoor monitor that gives me a VOC index outdoors.
Yeah. It's
going crazy sometimes, different than summer. And then the winter one is showing, the PM 2.5 and PM 10 particulate matter, of that micron size, which is air pollution. Yeah, it's going crazy sometimes too, because I need more data. I need to figure it out, but before I talk about it extensively, but yeah, something weird is going on, and our air is not great all the time here in the city. Yeah. And you look around at different air quality stations that are like this one, this $500 station, and there's some bad air in other places of the city too, and you can't really blame the wind. But I'm further coming to the conclusion that even a light wind going against between me and industry is not enough to stop the industry pollution from coming here. That's my early conclusion, but I'll continue to monitor that and try and figure it out, and maybe talk to an expert someday if I can. Our friend Dean dropped me a note the other day. He said, your last podcast episode was well done, jammed with lots of stuff in that one. And does that mean all of our podcast episodes are not well done? I guess he particularly liked last week's episode. And I said, Dean, that's going into the show. Yeah. You can't send me a message, and I've got to put it into the show if you do that. One little note that's a personal grievance of mine is that Spotify is the only streaming service that hasn't gone lossless. So they compress their audio to not MP3s, but a type of compression that takes out some of the audio quality. If you think of CDs as kind of the baseline, Spotify has finally done that, because my family insists on using Spotify. I've tried Apple Music, I've tried Amazon, and they have, music that goes all the way up that's pretty much a duplicate of the Studio Master digital recording. Like it's really high end, but Spotify goes up to 24-bit, which is better than CD, and that the bit depth, if you're into that, and 44.1. I wish it was 48, like our podcast, as far as the sampling rate goes, but yeah, so they got that, and I really appreciate it. At the gym, at my home stereo, It's like having CDs now, you know, like anywhere, like all the CDs ever made.
Yeah.
So it's great. I'm so happy about that.
So our podcast is on Spotify, but that's probably not lossless.
No, it's not lossless, but it could be. And maybe one day it will be. If you want lossless for our podcast, and if you're an audiophile, go to our Patreon, because that one is in higher quality. Not completely. It could be lossless if you called for it. If the audience screamed for it, I could do it that way. But yeah, right now it's just higher quality, and it's just our voices. So there's a limit to how high you should probably go with voices as far as quality before it's not really doing anything for you. But yeah, I do appreciate that.
Okay, so COP30 is underway in Brazil. This is the worldwide climate conference that happens every year, and it always kind of remains to be seen what is going to come out of it. It's still going on, but the buzzword for this year very much is a fossil fuel phase out. So we're going to see if there can be any kind of agreement on that. Brazil's environment minister has urged all countries to have the courage to address the need for a fossil fuel phase out, calling the drawing up of a roadmap for it an ethical response to the climate crisis. A lot of things that come out of COP, though, of course, are not really binding, but the language around COP is always the thing that everybody kind of watches to see what actually is said, because it does matter in some sense. At COP28, there was a historic resolution that was 2 years ago where they said they were going to transition away from fossil fuels, and just agreeing on that language, even though it's not binding, was kind of a big deal at the time. So that's the hope, is to build on that resolution from 2 years ago and go from a transition to a phase out with some type of schedule. So yeah, that's what's going on at the COP summit in Brazil.
Now, my understanding is that Saudi Arabia is not cooperating with this fossil fuel phase out. They will not sign on. And that is kind of the problem, because everybody needs to sign on. Even Russia, for God's sake, needs to sign on. And the United States, of course, is the only country, as Al Gore has pointed out on a recent Zero podcast, the United States is the only country that has left the Paris Agreement. Even evil countries that, like Russia and probably a few others, are in there and participating and being part of the world community. But yeah, so Saudi Arabia obviously wants to sell and burn as much oil as possible. And the International Energy Agency, we haven't touched on this on the show, but they've come up with a controversial new forecast for oil that says it grows slightly until 2050. And the reason they did that, supposedly, according to analysts, is because of Trump. Because Trump forced them. A lot of their funding for the International Energy Agency comes from the United States.
Yeah. Now, I read a thing from Hannah Ritchie, who is an excellent Substacker who writes about clean energy and whatnot. And she dissected that, and the headlines, she says, are really kind of wrong on that, because it's really just, it's a scenario that it increases to 2050, but it wasn't an actual prediction from the IEA. It's just one of the possible scenarios, but they never said that it was the most likely or anything like that.
Well, why have it then? Because in this scenario, for instance, EVs grow in China and Europe, and only in China and Europe.
Yeah.
For you to think that from now to 2050 that EVs are just going to put on the brakes and stop everywhere in the world but those two places, with the prices coming down and the technology improving and the battery costs diving, come on. I mean, why put it out there?
Yeah.
Why create these headlines?
It's true. They maybe shouldn't have done that, but it was, I think, in general, misinterpreted in all the headlines. So shouldn't be the headline takeaway that fossil fuel use is going to increase. That was just one
that's what's
possible
happening.
scenario.
That's the takeaway. And it's, once you put out information that is false or misread, it stays there. As we know, negative information stays there. But it's going to come to a shock to our fossil fuel politicians who latch on to that sort of news, and OPEC's own ridiculous forecasts, which are not based in reality. Wishful thinking. But I mean, as far as EVs go, they're expanding rapidly in the global south. Like, that's one of the places where they said nothing's going to happen. Well, the rate is going up between today and tomorrow. Like, it's that fast that you could probably add a decimal to something, like at the rate that they're increasing. So it's kind of weird. Yeah. The New York Times, Brian, has a expose on how solar power is shining after Hurricane Melissa tore through Jamaica. And they talked to some people who had solar panels on their homes there who had them not ripped off, apparently, by the hurricane winds. And apparently they have strong codes there, as they should, for hurricanes. And if you put them on properly and you mount them right on the roof, that's a good place to put them. I think that if you had, a larger space and you're putting them on the ground, those are struggle more because debris can hit them and so forth. But when they are broken, it's usually like one panel. Like they talked about an example of, and when one panel breaks, you've had a defect in 2 or 3 of your panels when you first got it installed, but the system worked, did it not?
Oh, yeah, it still worked. Absolutely.
So that's what happens, with solar. The nice thing about it, if it is damaged, and they're pretty resistant, you can, solar farms on utility scale, they'll actually forecast hail and things like that, and put the solar panels at an angle that deflects hail, without a direct hit. So that's a good thing. But these people were able to charge their phones, which is a big thing because, the power can go not only for days, but weeks after a hurricane, especially in a country like Jamaica. On the island there, you get cold drinks in the refrigerator, which is important after a while. If even hot weather, they're getting these solar panels are often installed with batteries on the people who can afford them. And of course, Jamaica is not the richest country in the world, but there are people in the middle class who can afford solar and batteries. And there's movements to push the government to improve their subsidies for solar because it's, this is going to happen over and over, and it's going to be worse and worse, as we know, due to climate change. So that, after the hurricane blew through, the next day you wake up in the morning, the sun is often shining in places, which actually is a downfall in places like Florida. You hear examples of, it's hot and humid now and we don't have any AC because the power is out. But the fact that the sun was shining means that their solar was charging their batteries and they had power again. So some people actually stayed at people's houses who had solar and batteries to stay cool and have food that's not rotting. They take their food over to people's houses. We couldn't do that here because my wife keeps the deep freeze completely full. I don't know what's in there. Turkey carcasses from 10 years ago. I'm afraid to dig deep to see what it is. But she did make turkey soup last night, so maybe there's a little space, but not much. So Jamaica is reliant on oil and gas from abroad. You have to ship it in. There's no pipeline to Jamaica. You got to put it on a ship and dock it on a port and pump it out. Solar and other renewables were 10% of the grid in 2023 in Jamaica, which isn't bad, and certainly room for improvement, rapid improvement. 1.4 megawatts in 2015, and now it's 65 megawatts in 2023. That's the latest figures on the small island with solar. So that's increased rapidly, and I expect the next few years to continue on. Some people remove panels ahead of hurricanes, which was surprising. They mentioned that in the story. So if they had lost them before, they will actually go up and remove them. But it's an important thing. You don't want to lose them, and they're expensive. And depends on how they're installed. So there's a guest lodge there that put up solar and batteries for $30,000, but their power bills at that lodge were $1,000 per month, US dollars. So they paid off in less than 3 years, which is really fast. Our electricity here is cheap, so it takes like 10, 11, 12 years to pay off, a long time. Yeah. But the more expensive your electricity is, the faster these things get paid off and the more worthwhile it is. So power can be out for many days or even weeks after the hurricane. And this is from the article, solar panels remain beyond the reach of many Jamaicans, but prices are falling rapidly as Chinese gear floods into the market. In recent years, the Jamaican government has also started providing a solar income tax credit, and banks have begun to offer more financing, which is important because banks, with renewables, they don't know what it is, so they don't finance it.
Yeah, but if it can be paid off by a lower electricity bill in 3 years, then they should absolutely finance it.
But it's a thing that bankers often don't understand, but once they do, you're golden. So their electric utility also now compensates solar households for the excess electricity they put back into the grid. They didn't before. So once you do that, because you have extra electricity, even if you have a battery, you can fill that battery up, and then you're wasting that electricity unless the grid pays, 2 ways. If it goes back into the grid, If it was sunny today, I would be putting electricity back into the grid, and so would you from our rooftops, and we get paid for it. The question is, how much do you get paid? Because, it's good to get paid the retail amount, but then that's a subsidy, as opposed to a wholesale amount, which is a lot less. This whole thing is helping Jamaica make progress towards its goal of generating 50% of its electricity from renewables by 2030. And Clean Technica wrote this analysis on the expose in the New York Times. It said that plug-in solar is gaining popularity for residents who can't install rooftop solar. Plug-in solar is like a thing you go to the store, you spend $200, $300, $400, $600, you bring home some solar panels, and it has a little device on it, an inverter, and you plug it into the wall, and it goes into your apartment or your house and powers your house. And there's a lot of regulations against that. But these small self-installed solar systems that plug directly into the household outlet and start offsetting power instantly make it no need to have a contractor or any permits. And a lot of that is the expensive part of solar in North America. Not so much in Australia, because they've figured that out. Red tape is one of the most expensive parts of getting a solar system installed in your house. And experts are saying that with just a handful of state-level reforms, plug-in solar could reach 60 million American homes by 2035 and slash household electricity costs. So all it would take is a few states to, change their regulations and cut the red tape and allow this. Regulation's always a thing with things we talk about, and it's a slow-moving process, but some jurisdictions move faster than others.
Yeah, and plug-in solar systems like this, huge in Germany, as we've talked about on the show. People often put them on their balconies, and not everyone can afford to put a full-blown system on their roof. Not everyone has a roof. A lot of people live in apartments, but people want to lower their electricity bills, and they want to do something to help the planet. And this is an absolute no-brainer, but you have to have the regulations in place so you're allowed to do it. All right, this is from Electrek. Rivian, they've been selling electric bikes for a little while. This is Rivian, the electric car maker, and they came out with their first model a while ago. They have a sub-brand called Also, and this is their bicycle brand. And this story is about they have a new model. So the first one was $4,500 US, pretty expensive. And the new one that just came out, $3,500 US. So a nice improvement. It doesn't have quite as much power, doesn't have quite as much range, but it's obviously a little more affordable. One of the interesting things I thought, both of these bikes, they've got a drive-by-wire system. So there's no physical connection between the pedals and the bike.
What?
It literally turns a generator instead of turning any kind of a chain or turning the wheels on the bike.
Oh, that blows my mind. Wow. Is that ever weird?
Yeah. Now, I'm not sure if that's a good idea or not. Like, I haven't...
We don't know. We don't know.
Yeah. I have an electric bike.
I would feel weird pumping a generator instead of, pumping a chain. Like, I would get lazy, I think, if I had to struggle with that.
Possibly, and I don't know what the resistance is like, but
that is such a weird take. That is such a weird take on electric bikes. That why? And is it interesting? I'm looking forward to a review.
Well, and of course, that's somehow how some like hybrid cars worked. Like the original Chevy Volt it had a gasoline engine, but the gasoline engine just drove a generator.
In the second generation.
In the
first generation. The second generation, I think it was connected to the wheels at some point. Yeah. And no one liked that. So the second generation, which was a great car. Why did they get rid of it?
It seems like a cool bike. It's sort of an unusual looking bike. You'd have to sort of Google a picture of it to see what it looks like. But one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is that it's not light. It's very heavy. And most electric bikes are very heavy. And this has always seemed weird to me because I have one of the lightest electric bikes that you could have, and it still seems too heavy to me. Like, it seems like making these things light is important. Now, like if it's a cargo bike, then sure, maybe the weight doesn't matter. Like maybe it's a 3-wheel cargo bike that you're using to deliver pizzas or something, then yeah, the weight doesn't matter. But I think for most of us, the weight matters. Like I store my bikes in a shed and I have an upright rack for them. So I have to pull up the front wheel and put it in the upright rack, so it takes up a little less space. We take them inside the house for the winter, that kind of thing. So the weight always matters to me, but I don't know, most e-bikes are heavy and people don't seem to care about this.
Well, I've got one. It's heavy. It's not as heavy as some, but it's a cheap one, so I'm getting heavy. I'm not, if you pay a lot of money, you get cheaper.
Yeah.
If you buy like a Trek for $4,000, but here's the thing, it's not just the weight of the motor, although they are making those lighter as they are in electric cars, and it matters because it's better to have something that's 500 pounds instead of 700 pounds in a car because it increases your range and drivability and all that. But they are doing it with electric bikes as well. And, the battery, of course, is heavy, but it's beyond that. They do make them sturdy, which is something I've noticed.
Yeah.
Because you've got a lot of torque and a lot of power. A flimsy, really lightweight aluminum wheel would fall apart.
Yeah.
Because I've done it myself once when I was in Toronto and I had my sort of a hybrid road bike there. It wasn't one of those really thin tires, but it was somewhat thin. It wasn't mountain bikey.
Yeah.
And I was gaining weight and I put my foot on the pedal and torqued it and my wheel buckled.
Really?
And I was standing on the pedal, not the back, not the seat even. I wasn't even standing on the seat, so the weight was distributed. And the torque from that pedal from my weight buckled the wheel.
Wow.
And I had to get that fixed. So, yeah. That's something I'm careful about now. But yeah, it just goes to show. And the frames are really heavy. Like, I don't think they need to be.
Yeah.
But I know the wheels themselves tend to be heavy. And in fact, if you're going, 35 kilometers an hour, whatever you're allowed, 32, I guess, in North America, they can be intense. You want to, like a motorcycle, you want to be able to have the brakes be robust and stop you.
Yeah, and of course, you have the battery and the electric motor to move it along. So moving it along when it's heavy isn't really the problem. It's, all the other stuff you have to do with a bike. And of course, lighter bikes are more expensive as well. So I guess to keep the costs down, you could make your bike out of heavier materials. But that's what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for a movement where the electric bikes are finally getting lighter.
I think, I can't remember exactly, but I think a high quality light mountain bike might be 18 pounds, maybe a little bit less. Yeah. And I think, a version of that for an electric bike can be with the battery. Even without the battery, I think it can be, 35 to 45, even 55 pounds, depending on the car. And if you're putting e-bikes on your, say you have a car bike rack that goes on a hitch mount and you have, those have weight limits. So if you put a whole bunch of, it matters in that. And not only is it hard to lift them up, but it could collapse what you're, you're carrying it with, which is something you encountered once, which was a very unpleasant experience on a vacation. And I just wanted to point out about the Spotify thing. It's only rolled out, to my knowledge, in America and Canada, and they're going to roll it out to the rest of the world. And I know a lot of people are outside North America listen to our show, and I don't want to get your hopes up, but it should be coming very soon to everyone. Purdue has developed a sodium-ion battery. There's people from India who's also working on this, but they've developed a sodium-ion battery that's good to minus 100 degrees Celsius.
Amazing.
That is amazing because, we talk about how cold it gets here. We use our province in Saskatchewan, Canada as an example. If we could do it here, we could do it anywhere. It does get very cold here, and I imagine the batteries need heating here. The utility scale batteries, there aren't many of them, but they have cold weather packages that heat the battery, so you're using a little bit of electricity for that. Yeah. I think better insulation would be a good idea. They don't seem to want to insulate these containers with the batteries in them. But that seems like a thing because the batteries themselves produce heat when they charge and discharge. Yeah. But a sodium-ion battery is something that's relatively new, that's been only commercialized in the last few years, mostly out of China. But Brian, it's really taking off. Yeah. I've got a story later in the lightning round about an American company deploying them in the United States. But the Chinese companies that have made them have developed and commercialized the technology and ironed out the right recipe for them to work. And they boast about them going down to minus 30 in cars without needing heat. And right now, lithium-ion batteries need, I think my car turns on a heater at minus 17. So it tries to keep it minus 20 or above. And of course, this doesn't apply to most of you out there, but for us, we're trying to decarbonize our grid, and it's really hard here. And batteries could be part of the solution. And the great thing about sodium-ion batteries instead of lithium-ion, you're basically swapping out a similar element, sodium for lithium. And sodium is, of course, a lot more abundant in the world, on the planet, than lithium is, easier to process. And so the batteries are cheaper, which is a huge deal. And also another benefit, the big drawback is that they're not energy dense. That's not great for cars or airplanes, things like that. But the fact, if you put them on a grid, it doesn't matter how heavy they are. It doesn't matter if they're really heavy or really, take up 20% more space, because the footprint of utility scale batteries is small, and you could stack them up like a skyscraper if you wanted to. No one's done that yet, to my knowledge, but you could, in theory, do that and power New York City. It would power a lot with that sort of footprint. But they've developed this in the United States. It's a pouch cell of sodium ion. You can have cylindrical cells like you would use in a flashlight, or these pouch cells, which are in a lot of things like cell phones or other things as well. It's a different format, and they've been testing it at minus 100. Now, it gets down to maybe minus 45 here occasionally, once in a blue moon, once in every several years, maybe in some places. Kind of like the thing that you have to plan for. So if we had that here, there's no excuse for us not to decarbonize our grid when you have batteries that are cheaper. And the fact that they also last a long time, they have cycle lives that are like 30,000 times instead of 1,000. So that means the cost that you put into it for storing and deploying a unit of electricity, it becomes, horribly cheaper than it was before. And that means that you can deploy multi-day, maybe even. I think we're seeing like 8-hour storage now, but 6 months from now, we might be talking 10, 12 hours, getting deployed to places in the world. And at some point, we're talking like doing this by 2050. Come on. I mean, we're going to have multi-day, sodium ion battery storage by 2050 for sure. Maybe multi-week even, I would say. Maybe it's not the only solution, because you need to plan for even worse than that, but still. Yeah, so reliably working at minus 100. Of course, this makes it useful in space as well, because space don't have heat.
Yeah. I heard a story recently about, they're thinking about, there's a huge problem with, we need all these AI data centers to process all this AI data. So they're talking about putting them in space now, putting these, processing.
Oh, come on. Come on.
Well, one of the reasons is that a lot of the energy used for these AI data centers is in cooling the systems, because when you have these things on Earth, they produce a ton of heat and you have to cool them. But space is really cold. Hey, we can just put these up in space and then the cooling takes care of itself. But apparently it's not as simple as that. You still have to have some kind of a plate attached to them to radiate the heat out. So it's not going to work as well as maybe people initially thought.
And we've recently had stories about putting data centers in the ocean, which is cold.
Yeah.
And can dissipate, but then there's problems with salinity and, and all that. Well, anyway, getting back to the sodium-ion battery that works down to minus 100, the research group led by scientists from Purdue University has fabricated this battery in a pouch cell using components that are compatible with extremely low temperatures and tested under harsh conditions while connected to renewable energy sources. So they did two things. They tried these out with like wind turbines indoors and solar indoors, and then they went outdoors. They didn't use it on a giant turbine, but they used it on small turbines and small solar installations to test this outdoors. Of course, they got it down to minus 100 degrees Celsius in a lab. That was not replicable outdoors. Yeah, and I have to wonder, aren't we here where you and I are podcasting from the perfect place for something like this?
Yeah.
Because, this is what's going to be happening in the future. And it has a small footprint, and we can put lots of these up once they become commercialized. And they are becoming commercialized very quickly. Not this particular one, but they made it so that it can be commercialized. They use techniques of other commercialized sodium-ion and lithium-ion batteries so that this can be replicated in a commercialized way, which is great forward thinking of them to do that.
Yeah, sodium-ion has taken off really quickly. It just seems like only a couple of years ago that we were talking about it. Oh, there's great new formula, sodium ion, and then it's already in stuff now. It happened quick.
It is, and rapidly expanding, and we're not even at the S curve yet. Like, we're only just slowly expanding, and at one point it's just going to take off in a big way.
All right, from Canary Media, China and Europe are cooperating on a green steel standard. So as we know, steel production can create a lot of carbon emissions. It's also one of the world's most traded commodities, with a third of the global supply of steel crossing borders. So that makes decarbonizing this sector a challenge when different companies or different governments rely on different criteria to determine the amount of emissions to contribute to a ton of steel. And this is important because all governments are going to have some kind of standard at some point to, for the total amount of carbon production allowed in their country and in their system. This is what they're talking about at COP right now and hoping to come up with some sort of regulations. So everyone's going to have to account for this steel at some point and do the accounting to figure out how much carbon is in this steel. And there are cleaner ways to make steel. And, this is really going to matter at some point, because if you want to export your steel to a country that has strict carbon regulations, they're going to want it to be clean steel. So there's two industry associations, one in China and one in Europe, and they've signed an agreement with the Australian nonprofit Responsible Steel to set some internationally coherent standards for what qualifies as green steel. And the three organizations now represent about 60% of global steel production. So this is a big deal if these groups can agree on this. But it's a difficult problem. How do you measure what kinds of natural gas and coal, the amounts that went into your steel? This is always difficult to figure out. You need some transparency around this. Otherwise, you could just get a vast difference in what one country says is the amount of carbon in the steel versus what another country says. So this is a nice step forward. There's a Chinese steelmaker that has already promised to send a shipment of green steel to Italy. So this is already starting to happen. There are cleaner, greener ways to make steel without so much fossil fuels. And this is just going to become more of a thing as time goes on.
One of these days, you're going to see a car advertisement on TV.
Yeah.
And it's going to say, made with green steel.
Yeah. Well, Hyundai has a real background in steel production. Hyundai was a sort of a steel maker first, I think, before they were a car company. So they're actually planning to build a green steel car plant in the U.S. And there was an article this week that they're going to continue with that, even though, the regulations in the U.S. have changed around this sort of thing. Hyundai apparently is going to go forward with that anyway.
So Evraz, who owns a steel mill about a mile or so away from me here, has an electric arc furnace as opposed to coal fired, and they recycle steel and turn it into oil pipelines. Yay. So even the thing that's polluting me, that's not, oil industry, it's related. It wouldn't function without the oil industry.
Yeah.
And I have to breathe their stuff. But they can have solar to power that or whatever. They could have renewables. And one of their operations in Colorado did that. It's not fully solar, but you're offsetting some of the electricity, and it's making it greener than it was before. I mean, they could buy an adjacent, it's on the edge of the city, they could buy an adjacent piece of farmland, and we have good solar here, great solar, and they could throw up 0.5 gigawatt of solar or something and power their plant, or most of it.
Yeah, having an electric arc furnace is sort of one of the steps, but then you have to power that, of course, with clean energy, or green hydrogen is another possibility. Green hydrogen can be used to make steel. So, early days, but it's good progress.
Well, Brian, we love to hear from our listeners, so contact us now. Anything that's on your mind. If you'd like to contact us about anything, drop us an email, cleanenergyshow, all one word, @gmail.com. That's cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And you can leave us a voicemail online, speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow.
Yes, we are an independent podcast, and it is made possible by the support of our listeners. So thank you so much, and check us out on patreon.com. As little as $1, you can support the podcast and get a little extra content. Check us out on Patreon.
And coming up next is the lightning round. It's time for the Lightning Round.
The Lightning Round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
South Korea, the good Korea, is boosting EV subsidies by 20%. Why? Mr. Donald J. Trump and his tariffs. They want to support their industry. Hyundai and Kia are very happy about this because they can sell and they are going strong on EVs. They're doing this largely because their companies are losing money thanks to Mr. Trump, because they're keeping their prices kind of down and eating some of the tariffs, which is making them a losing proposition to sell in America. In electric rights, earlier this month, Kia introduced a new $10,000 customer cash discount across its entire lineup. That's to combat the lack of $7,500 tax credit. Then the tariffs on top of that, so it's not great. The Hyundai Ioniq 5 remains one of the most affordable EVs in the United States, with leases starting as low as $189 per month, and I hate you for that. We don't have that here.
Yes, but it seems like a great car. I haven't actually driven one, but if you're in America, go and lease an Ioniq 5 for $189 a month. That sounds like a great deal.
Please. It is a great deal. It's a lot of car for the money. Small, compact SUV and very, very fast charging, 18 minutes, 10 to 80%. The Netherlands is forecast to reach 80 gigawatts of solar power by 2035. Yeah, that's the place that has worse solar than we do. Same place on the planet, pretty much. Same seasonality. And they're going to have 80 nuclear reactors worth of solar by 2035. Not entirely, but the peak output is that. They already have the most solar per capita in the world, the Netherlands does. But their capacity factor is 10%.
Yeah.
And our winter capacity factor in our worst month is about 10%.
Yeah.
And yet somehow they have a crap ton of solar and even more coming. So, come on, Saskatchewan, Canada, you fools. Even with a 10% capacity factor, Brian, 80 gigawatts of solar at 10% capacity is still 8 full-scale nuclear reactors.
Yeah.
The total output of that is the same, which is more than what we need to power our province. Total. Yeah. 18.3 million people there, 15 times our population, by the way, because we have a low population, big land mass. Plug and play, plug-in solar, as we mentioned earlier in the show, well, it's rising. As we reported, Utah has enacted a law allowing 1.2 kilowatt systems or smaller from interconnection rules. You don't have to, you can connect it.
Yeah.
Because when you plug it into your house, you're plugging it into the grid. Yeah. So it's not part of the rules that you have to have for that. And a Bright Saver study shows that if 5+ states adopt reforms, that this study forecasts that the cost of plug-in solar falls to just 50 cents a watt and pays back in 3 to 4 years. That's kind of similar to what it does in Europe.
Yeah.
And when that happens, everybody gets it. Everyone, including where we live, could get it, and our grid could have 8% of solar just from that. Yeah. Let alone what the stupid government is doing. 24 million homes would use it, they estimate, if just 5+ states adopted reforms. That's a lot. And something like 1 in 5 households would use it in those states. So, yeah, we don't want solar, but we'll never enact these regulations. We'll never cut the red tape on that because they don't want it. But people are going to start doing it, I think.
I would probably add another 1.2 kilowatts of solar if this was allowed here to plug and play.
Why not?
Yeah.
And then think about your cottage.
Yeah.
Lots of options. India saw fossil fuel electricity generation fall in the first half of this year as clean power grew rapidly. We often think of India as coal-happy and late to the game when it comes to renewables, but they are catching up. Coal generations and the emissions overall fell even as India's economy was growing. And it's time for a CS Fast Fact. At COP30, there are 50 fossil fuel lobbyists for every delegate from the Philippines. So for every delegate there from the Philippines, there's 50 fossil fuel lobbyists. Just a random fact for you there. The 2027 Chevy Bolt has entered production in Kansas City. That means to say, the factory's up and running and they're spitting out cars.
Nice.
So you'll start seeing them at a dealership by the end of the year in the United States anyway. It's a car that I own, and I'm kind of following along with this. Volkswagen is one of the last automakers to gain access to the Tesla supercharger network, but its drivers are getting access this week. So there you go. We've been talking about this for years. The different automakers got access to the supercharger network. For some reason, Volkswagen was a laggard, but they're finally getting access now.
Yeah, the Tesla NACS charger is now the standard for North America. And Volkswagen finally the last to, and you'll still need an adapter for your Volkswagen because so far they've only come with a CCS port. So you get your adapter for a couple of $100 from Volkswagen, and now you can use the Tesla network, which is great.
BYD, the Chinese auto manufacturer, has cars with its God's Eye smart driving system. They're calling it the God's Eye Smart. Think Tesla FSD, but with God's Eye, with a weirder name. It's not going to surpass 2 million sales. There's 2 million cars that they've made with this on the market, which is pretty quick because they just announced it recently. Vehicles equipped with smart driving systems from BYD now generate over 130 million kilometers of assisted driving data daily. So when they drive around, they learn.
Yeah.
And it's important to learn because you want these systems to be smart.
I wish I could learn while I was driving around.
Oh, not anymore. Can't teach an old dog new tricks. Not while the dog is driving. U.S. sodium-ion startup Peak Energy is deploying a 720 megawatt-hour battery energy storage system for Jupiter Power. And that is just kind of remarkable because it's a U.S. company doing it. And they're deploying sodium ion for a grid. There's a picture of it here in our script, and it's not that different than any other, it's like a container type of thing with some ventilation in it. And it's happening. It's just boom. It's like, this is going to transform the world.
Yeah.
And it's one of these quiet things that will transform the world in the background, and no one will really understand what's going on unless you are smart and you listen to the Clean Energy Show podcast, coming to you weekly. New projections from the International Energy Agency under their current policy scenario, which you mentioned earlier, foresee that demand for oil will continue to increase through 2050, but the forecast, as we've talked about earlier on the show, makes some assumptions that EVs will not grow outside, and, well, it's a pointless forecast to even make it. I don't know why they did, but I've mentioned that before. We've mentioned things like this before on the show, and that is film and TV production using batteries instead of generators. Because when you work on a film and you're on location, they need lots of power. Less than they used to, because the lights are now LED, but they still need lots of power for things, powering the trailers and things. We talked about battery systems being used. We talked about a grid tie-in in Vancouver in popular filming locations where you just plug in lots of heavy things to this grid. But this one is weird. It's from Sky. It has launched a hybrid hydrogen and sodium battery system for film and TV. It's a sodium battery, which is kind of interesting in itself because we've been talking about that all show. But they've hybridized it with hydrogen for some reason. And it's delivering diesel level power with zero emissions. That's another thing. When you have a generator for a film, there's noise canceling technology, noise quieting technology, but you got to park it like a block away.
Way far away.
Or something like that. Because you can't have noise on your set. And then you also have emissions. So you got crew members who are breathing that crap. Yeah. And neighborhoods which may not be happy about having that coming into their home for a new episode of Matlock or whatever is filming outside your house. Yeah. So these battery systems are great, but this is a first for the industry, and I've got a link to that if you're curious. Well, it's time for another CES Fast Fact. Since the Paris Agreement was signed 10 years ago, solar power has rose from providing just 1% of global electricity in 2015 to 8.8% in the first half of this year, and the rate of that expansion is increasing, and God knows what we'll have in 2035, 2050, but it won't be stopped by Mr. Trump or anything else. Economics is more powerful than dictators. At the time, coal was king and threatened 4 degrees of global heating, but coal has fallen off the map now, which is nice to see, and it's way behind solar and wind. Waymo is going to be rolling out driverless taxis, that is robo-taxis, on highways in 3 U.S. cities. The risk? Death.
Yeah.
Because at higher speeds, something goes wrong. I won't be the first user. I do believe in Waymo strongly, in their technology and the safety record, but I don't want to be the first guy to go on a highway. So it's not, you have to be an early adopter and opt into that, but that sort of restricts them because they can't go on the freeways. It sort of restricts them if your trips to neighborhoods if you can't go on a higher speed thing. And I know their system has had some crashes, even with a driver at the wheel, which is kind of weird. And finally this week, Scotland's first wind farm was installed 30 years ago. 30 years ago. This will be the late 90s.
Yeah.
And wind farms, as we've said on the show many times, last 30 years approximately. The Hagshaw Wind Farm originally had 26 wind turbines, which gave 16 megawatts of power. And now they've redone those turbines, and they've repowered them with just 14 new turbines. So they replaced 26 with 14 and came up with nearly 80 megawatts instead of 16.
Yeah.
So that shows you how advanced the wind power has become over 30 years. And that's still happening. They're not going to go on forever, but they are making them bigger offshore and, improving that technology.
Yeah, they're getting bigger and more efficient. There was a story this week, too. The first recyclable wind turbine blades have come out. This has been a bit of a sticky point. The wind turbine blades aren't always easily recyclable, and after that 30 years, they might just go into a landfill. But there's a formula now. There is a company that's selling blades that can be sort of dismantled and the materials recycled as well.
So it has 5 times the capacity as the first generation of them, this wind farm in Scotland. So 5 times is pretty significant, with less wind turbines. And when they replace it in 30 years again, I'm certain it won't be a 1-for-1 replacement. It may not be, that many times better, but it might be twice as good. Yeah. Who knows? This is how clean energy works, Brian. It gets cheaper, it gets better, and it gets more recyclable because, how many wind turbines were there in the world until recently? And now we're starting to think about recycling. Now we're starting to think about recycling solar, and it can be done, and which kind of surprises me, but, and batteries are really well recycled where you don't have to mine them anymore. Eventually, you'll just keep reusing the minerals over and over and over again. And that's good news. And
on that good news, we are going to wrap up the show for this week. You can find us on social media, Clean Energy Pod. And remember that Patreon, patreon.com/Clean Energy Pod. And email us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And remember to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you're listening to this podcast right now.
As always, we give a shout out weekly to our Clean Club executive Patreon members, Brent Rotley and Green Bastard. So thank you to everyone else for supporting the show on Patreon. Thanks to all for listening. We really appreciate it. We'll see you again in 7 days.
See you next week.